3 things today about what survives a conversation and what quietly doesn't. First, when a chat has actually stopped working, which is not when it gets long, and the usual advice costs you everything you'd established. Second, the 4 layers of memory in this project, counted rather than described, because one of them is doing more work than the other 3 put together. And third, the uncomfortable one. 5 days ago, I measured my own writing drifting, said so on camera, and today I went back to check what that was actually worth. Start with the advice everyone gives and why it's aimed at the wrong thing. Here's when a conversation has actually stopped working, and none of these is about length. You've corrected the same thing twice. That's the big one, because it means the correction isn't sticking. You've moved on to a genuinely different job, or you find yourself re-explaining context you already gave. Any of those, and starting fresh helps. Being long, on its own, doesn't. But here's the actual move, and it's why the length stopped matching here. A rule you say in a chat has to survive everything said after it. A rule in a file gets read again from scratch on every single run. 373 words have been typed into this conversation in 19 days. 53,000 are written down in the repo, and that's the half that's still working. So when you catch yourself typing, remember to always stop and put it somewhere that gets read. A memory file, a config, a line in a project doc, or best of all, a check that refuses to finish if you break it. This project has 61 places where a build stops itself, spread across 18 files, and every one of them started as something I said once in this conversation and then moved somewhere it couldn't be forgotten. That's the whole trick. Not a longer chat, not a shorter one, fewer things that only exist in it. Second, everything this project remembers, and how unequal those layers turn out to be. For layers, 5 memory files, which survive into a completely new conversation on any machine. For config files, the tools read on every run. 12 documents holding the decisions and why they were made. And then 61 enforcement points. And those 4 layers are not equal, which is the part worth knowing. Memory and config get read automatically, so they work. 51,000 words of documentation only work if somebody opens the file, and most days nobody does. Enforcement is the only layer that cannot be ignored, because a build that breaks the rule doesn't finish. So that's how I'd rank any note to self now, and it took me 19 days to see it. Not by how well written it is, by how easy it is to skip. A thing you said in a chat can be forgotten by the next message. A document can be not opened for a fortnight. A config gets read every run, so it survives being ignored. And a check that stops the build cannot be skipped at all, which is why 61 of them are doing more work than 51,000 words of documentation. Write the rule down, then ask yourself what happens if nobody reads it. If the answer is nothing, you haven't finished. And third, what noticing a problem is actually worth, measured on myself. 1. On the day I measured it and put the number on screen, all 3 scripts came back inside the band. The 4 days after that, a third of them were out again, almost exactly where they'd been before I noticed. Same writer, same band, and the band was fixed on day 14 and never refitted. So this isn't me moving the goalposts. And here's the comparison that actually settles it. 2 rules about my own writing. The first one I measured and talked about. The second one I wrote into the pipeline as a hard stop. Hooks capped at 20 words, and the voice step refuses to run if you go over. Before that cap, my hooks averaged 37 words, and the worst was 56. Since it existed, 0 breaches in 9 scripts. Not fewer, 0. So that's the finding, and I don't especially enjoy it. Noticing a problem, measuring it properly, and announcing it publicly bought me exactly 1 day of doing better. The thing that worked was a check that wouldn't let me continue. And notice it isn't willpower or attention. It's that one of them can be ignored and the other genuinely can't. Which means every time I write down a lesson from now on, the real question isn't whether it's true. It's whether anything happens when I break it. If the answer is nothing, I've written a note, and yesterday's data says a note is worth about a day. So here's the 3-question test I'd run on any lesson now, and it comes straight out of today's numbers. 1. Can you count it? Sentence length is countable. Write more clearly isn't, and an uncountable lesson can never become anything more than a note. 2. Where does the count live? If it lives in your head or in a conversation, it's gone by next week. If it lives in a script, it gets recomputed from scratch every time. And 3. The one that actually decides it. What breaks when the count comes back wrong? If the honest answer is nothing, you have not finished, and my own data says you've bought about a day. Notice how small the step is between those 2 states. The sentence length finding was already measured, already automated, already printing a number. All it was missing was a line that says, if this is out of band, stop. 3 things worth keeping. Start a fresh chat when a correction stops sticking, not when the chat gets long. Rank everything you write down by how easily it can be ignored, not by how well you wrote it. And when you learn something, wire it to a stop, because knowing it bought me 1 day, and the stop has held for 9 scripts running. And the thread through all 3, which I think is the most useful thing this channel has turned up in 19 days. Memory is not about remembering. Every layer today that actually worked because something reread it without being asked, the config on every run, the check before every build. Every layer that failed because it relied on somebody choosing to look, the documentation nobody opens, the finding I announced, and then drifted away from within a week. So the question was never how do I remember this? It's what rereads this when I'm not thinking about it. And the slightly bruising version, from my own data, I am the least reliable place to store anything, and I had to measure it twice to believe it. That's day 19. 3 shorts every day and a full cut like this each evening. Subscribe if it's useful to you.